Welcome back to the deep dive. Get comfortable because the sources we've been given for this deep dive are, well, they're less a collection of papers and more of a unified, pretty radical manifesto.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
They describe an absolute, a seismic global transformation. I mean, we're talking about a complete societal and spiritual reset. It's a comprehensive document that weaves together high theology, revolutionary economics, and eschatology.
And that's the key, isn't it? The unity and the scale. Our mission today is to that the current era, which they label the Dark Age or the Age of the Devil, is ending right now. And that a new age, an age of abundance, is beginning. And that this is all in fulfillment of ancient global prophecy.
Okay, so let's establish that grand historical structure right away. Because when we talk about eschatology, the study of end times, it can sound very abstract. But the sources frame our current experience within a structure they call the concept of the four ages.
You can think of it like a clock face or maybe the natural order of the four seasons. But instead of weeks or months, these cycles span thousands and thousands of years. It's a cosmology where life, just like the seasons, naturally declines from a golden era into a dark, chaotic one, and then it regenerates.
It's cyclical.
It is. And the critical claim for us, for anyone listening, is that the world is currently living in the final, most chaotic stage, what they call the Age of the Devil, and that this age is decisively closing now.
And that historical context becomes the stage for everything else they claim. The arrival of a Messiah, this new economic system. It all has to play out against that backdrop.
It's the foundation. Without it, none of the other pieces make sense in their framework.
The pace of that decline is important, too. It's not like a gentle slide. The sources suggest that in the earliest ages, divine law, which they call dharma, was fully manifest. It was clear.
Perfectly clear. But as the ages progress, human memory, wisdom, and, our moral adherence, it erodes. It just starts to decay. And that allows dharma, which is chaos, injustice, fragmentation, to rise until it reaches its absolute peak in this current dark age.
And what's the mechanism for that? How does that evil, for lack of a better word, get a foothold?
Well, the sources are very specific about this. They suggest that as the Age of the Devil began, the devil himself sought a foothold, a place to dwell and exert influence over humanity. And this leads us directly to one of the most surprising claims in this whole introduction.
And that's the hook. It's really two intertwined claims that they immediately grab your attention. First, that the long-awaited messianic figure, this divine presence that's been anticipated across Jewish, Christian, and Hindu traditions,
has already arrived,
not coming soon,
Yeah.
is here. And second, that this figure is kicking off this new era with a proposal for a revolutionary economic structure, one designed to completely replace money itself.
And starting in a very specific place.
Right. Starting in the small, apparently pivotal nation of Nepal, it suggests that spiritual destiny and economic structure are, in this view, completely inseparable. You can't have one without the other.
That is the mission statement of the Age of Abundance in a nutshell. But if we're going to truly grasp this new vision, we have to first really, really analyze the source's spiritual critique of the old world. We have to understand the spiritual economics of this dark age.
The nature of money itself.
The true nature of money within it, yes.
So let's move into that. Section 2, mastering money. The source material, it does not treat currency as some simple, neutral tool for exchange. Not at all. It gives money a profound and very negative spiritual role.
It's explicitly called the devil's tool.
Right, and defined as a specific foothold in this world where temptation takes root.
And that phrasing is a fundamental theological assertion. It's not just a metaphor. When the current age, the Age of the Devil, began, the devil was, according to the source, granted space to dwell, and one of the primary spaces granted to him was the institution of money.
So money isn't just an incidental problem, it's a spiritually charged mechanism.
A mechanism of temptation and division, yes.
Yeah.
And the ultimate spiritual warning of this age is, it's direct and it's uncompromising. When money becomes your master, your soul is lost, period.
So the spiritual challenge for any person living in this Age of the Devil isn't just about, getting rich or avoiding being poor. It's about achieving genuine mastery over money. And that's a crucial distinction we really need to unpack.
It is the defining test of character in this age. The source clarifies that having less money, that is explicitly not defined as a spiritual failure, not at all. The real spiritual danger is focused squarely on the wealthy, or those who are pursuing wealth, whose hearts and actions are enslaved by their possessions.
Or by their greed, or just the pursuit of status that money brings.
Exactly. They become servants of the devil's tool. Regardless of what they say in church or in temple, their actions betray them.
And the sources give a remarkably practical, almost like a diagnostic tool, to test this spiritual mastery in yourself.
They do. They warn that the enslaved wealthy, those who serve the tool rather than humanity, will inevitably needle you and provoke you. It's a fascinating idea.
How so?
They might use their wealth or their power to make you feel small or inadequate or angry. They'll flaunt it or use it to manipulate a situation. And if, when you're provoked like that, anger or resentment or, crucially, envy arises up in you,
And the diagnosis is simple.
money still reigns over you. Your internal reaction to the material world, not your bank account, is the spiritual thermometer. It measures your freedom or your bondage.
That completely reframes the whole concept of success, doesn't it? Freedom, in this context, it's measured entirely in your character, in your ability to show kindness, unwavering fairness, and integrity, no matter how much money you have or how the people around you are acting.
It's all about achieving non-attachment, detaching your soul from the influences of scarcity and wealth accumulation, which are identified as the core domains of the devil's age. It's a spiritual discipline.
And this mastery over money, they claim, is actually synonymous with mastering the age itself. To illustrate this, the sources provide a highly detailed, very specific example of what this mastery looks like at the highest levels of power.
They point to the life and conduct of Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India.
Which is an interesting choice. I mean, he leads one of the world's fastest growing economies. You'd think they'd focus on his economic policies.
But they don't. They use his actions not to highlight policy, but to demonstrate what they see as complete financial disinterest and spiritual mastery. They tell these anecdotes from his time as Chief Minister of Gujarat.
What kind of anecdotes?
They focus heavily on his moral governance. The sources claim that during his extensive tenure, he never once shouted at a bureaucrat or a subordinate. Now, in high-pressure political environments, that's striking.
That's almost unheard of.
Right. And his reasoning, according to this manifesto, was rooted in the Hindu concept of non-duality. He saw the divine, he saw God, in every person he worked with. He would apparently ask himself, who is he to raise his voice at a piece of the divine?
So that establishes the moral and theological foundation for his leadership, in their view.
Precisely. But the financial detail is what really seals the argument for them on this point of non-attachment. The sources go into detail about his personal salary count.
What about it?
Well, because he lived simply and his government covered his basic living expenses, a lot of excess money it accumulated in his account over decades of public service.
And what did he do with it?
The claim is that instead of using it for himself or, transferring it to some personal investment portfolio, he just allowed it to accumulate. And eventually, he created a substantial public fund from that accumulated personal salary.
A public fund for what?
It was specifically earmarked to educate the children of his governmental staffers. He was essentially using his own unused personal wealth to directly serve the people around him and their families. And this is cited in the source as undeniable proof that he has no hunger for money, none.
So the lesson they're synthesizing from this complex political figure is actually intensely simple.
Very simple. The age of the devil demands that you do not serve money. You don't let it provoke you or define your self-worth. Instead, you master it through non-attachment, and you use all your resources, whether it's your time or your accumulated wealth, to serve humanity.
And this active service is presented as the essential prerequisite for moving into this new age, the age of light. An abundance that the source claims isn't new at all, but was prophesied thousands of years ago, specifically in the book of Isaiah.
That's the bridge. That's how they connect personal spirituality to this grand global transformation. The age of abundance, which is economic and societal, must first be rooted in this personal spiritual mastery over the tools of division. This spiritual readiness then paves the way for the profound theological shift they claim is underway.
The convergence of prophecy.
Exactly.
Let's get into that, because this is a massive claim. We're moving from the individual spiritual tests to this grand global theological alignment. The source states, and I'm quoting here, that Jews, Christians, and Hindus have been separated and fragmented for centuries, awaiting different messianic figures when, in fact, all three await the same divine presence.
This is the unifying heart of the manifesto. It is direct challenge to literally thousands of years of established religious identity and, frankly, conflict. It insists that the different names for God are just different linguistic expressions of a singular eternal truth.
So when they say Yahweh is Vishnu,
they mean it literally. What Jews call Yahweh, the transcendent covenant-making God of Abraham, Hindus call Vishnu, the preserving and sustaining aspect of the Supreme Being. The source insists there is no division. The identities are one and the same. It's a radical claim of non-duality on a global scale.
And the implication is heavy. It suggests that the schism between these faiths is not divine in origin.
It's a human mistake. The source calls it a lie, a distortion, and an offense to the eternal truth, a product of colonial distortion, human ego, and a general tendency to thrive on separation rather than unity.
Okay, so to support this claim of a unified divine presence that's about to intervene, the sources draw heavily on ancient Hindu scriptures, specifically the Bhagavad Gita.
Yes, which the sources date back over 5,000 years. And there's a specific promise from Lord Krishna within the Gita that they present as the central anchor for this entire theological convergence.
Let's detail that promise, because it seems foundational to the whole manifesto's claim of intervention.
It is. Krishna declares, and this is the key passage, "Whenever there is a decline in dharma and a rise of adharma, I manifest myself." Now, this is not presented as poetry or some simple metaphor for spiritual renewal.
No, it's a declaration of intent.
A divine declaration of intent to physically intervene in human history whenever the moral order, the dharma, becomes so corrupted by injustice or adharma that the age becomes unsustainable. This is the divine mechanism for ending the Dark Age.
And the sources present this promise as being functionally identical to the core expectations of the Abrahamic faith, just, expressed through different cultural symbols.
Precisely. The Jewish anticipation of the Messiah who will restore justice, establish peace, and bring the exiled home. That's one part.
And then the Christian prayer that Jesus himself taught.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. All of these are framed as different expressions of the exact same anticipation. They share the core belief that human institutions cannot solve the problem of adharma on their own. Divine kingship, divine intervention, is required to reset the moral and societal order of the world.
To reinforce the credibility of this return, the sources then dig into the historical precedent of incarnation within the Hindu tradition. They claim that Yahweh Vishnu has already walked the earth multiple times,
which makes the promised return not some one-time speculation,
but an established, repeated pattern.
Exactly. And they cite two major examples, presenting them as historical figures, not as myths. First is Lord Rama, who they placed roughly 7,000 years ago. He's presented as the perfect embodiment of righteousness, ideal governance, moral order, a king who established what's known as Rama Raja, a golden age.
And the Ramayana, the text that tells his story.
They insist it's not a sacred story in the mythological sense. They say it's a civilizational record, detailing the physical geography and the political history of a prior golden age.
And the second example?
Lord Krishna, around 5,000 years ago. His life is documented in the Mahabharata. He acted as a divine strategist, a philosopher, a warrior, and a guide who intervened during a profound crisis to correct the course of history. The sources emphasize these aren't just isolated events. They establish the inevitability of the awaited return when Arbor reaches its peak.
This historical emphasis is clearly crucial because it allows the source to launch a pretty sharp analysis about the distinction we make between history and mythology.
It does. It argues forcefully against what it calls selective skepticism. They insist that these Hindu epics are records of real dynasties, real geographies, real politics, and massive wars. They are history preserved in a sacred narrative form.
So the source is arguing that treating these vast, detailed texts, the Mahabharata is longer than both the Iliad and the Odyssey combined, as merely mythology, while we often grant automatic historical credence to other ancient texts.
Is a cultural bias, yes. A bias used by outsiders, often colonial powers, to undermine what they assert is the eternal truth of Sanatana Dharma. It effectively relegates the foundational history of an entire civilization to the realm of fantasy.
So the takeaway for the listener is clear. The sources are asserting that the arrival of the Messiah is not some theological speculation based on faith alone, but the next logical step in a demonstrably repeated historical pattern of divine intervention.
An intervention required to fulfill a promise that was made millennia ago.
And this convergence, this historical pattern, it all culminates in the single, central, world-altering claim of the entire manifesto. The stage of history is set and the intervention has already occurred.
The sources deliver this claim with absolutely no ambiguity. The true, world-transforming Messiah, the divine presence awaited by all three of these major traditions, has already been born. And he is a Hindu.
Now that fulfillment is complex because the source has to address the Abrahamic expectations. How do they handle that?
They state that the prophecy of the Messiah returning in the line of David is declared to be fulfilled in Jesus. The current manifestation, they say, is a different figure, one who is born into the highest expression of the pure, eternal law, Sanatana Dharma, and whose mission is to inaugurate the age of prosperity, rather than focusing on the restoration of a specific geopolitical kingdom.
So a universal mission, not a tribal one.
A universal one. And this figure, the sources claim, has not only arrived, but has already begun the process of transformation. They say he has already outlined a roadmap for global peace, abundance, and justice.
And that roadmap is the link that finally ties the ancient prophecies and the spiritual mastery we talked about earlier directly to the practical economic blueprint we're going to analyze later.
It all connects. And the geographic element is pivotal. They emphasize Nepal as the epicenter of this awakening. It's the place where prophecy meets contemporary reality. The vision of global peace and prosperity isn't a theoretical model or a distant hope.
It's a work in motion.
A living demonstration already unfolding in that nation. The result of this divine intervention is proclaimed to be the dawn of a new age. The age of the Messiah, the age of prosperity, the age of unity.
The age of division, the age of the devil, is being systematically dismantled.
And the source urges humanity, specifically those still clinging to the old systems and old divisions, to recognize this figure now. To see past the entrenched religious walls before the full force of this global transition makes recognition, well, irrelevant.
That is a worldview that fundamentally challenges thousands of years of established doctrine, religious belief, and cultural identity. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
So before we dive into the profound practical implications of this, namely the economic blueprint, we have to address the sources' analysis of the forces they claim are actively preventing this unity. And this brings us to a highly controversial section.
Yes. We have to now transition to a part of the sources that contains some extremely polemical claims, specifically directed at the religion of Islam.
And just to be clear for everyone listening, as impartial guides to this source material, it is absolutely essential that we strictly present these claims as they are outlined in the manifesto. We are reporting on the content, not endorsing it.
Absolutely. The source transitions abruptly from this message of unity to asserting that Islam is a fabricated religion rooted in deception and, well, quite literally the religion of the devil. The stated goal, they say, is not to condemn individual believers, but to expose the belief system itself, calling it a devilish ruse leading to tyranny and division.
Okay, so what's the first core critique? It centers on historical authenticity, right? Questioning the central figure of Muhammad.
Yes. The source raises deep skepticism because Muhammad's biography relies almost entirely on traditions or hadith, which were compiled centuries after his supposed death. The source contrasts this directly with what they call the well-documented life of Jesus Christ.
And the conclusion they draw from that is severe.
Very. Without a verifiable historical Muhammad documented by immediate contemporaries, the narrative must have been constructed later. It's labeled a human invention rather than divine revelation. A political and theological construction designed specifically to unify disparate Arab tribes under a forceful new religious and military banner.
And they claim it did this by mixing elements of Judaism, Christianity, and local Arabian paganism.
Correct. The second critique then focuses on the distortion of the nature of God, specifically the Islamic conception of Allah. They argue it fundamentally deviates from the divine nature of Yahweh Vishnu.
How so? What's the core difference they point to?
The Quranic Allah is described in the source as a highly disfigured portrayal of the loving relational God of Abraham. The core tension is framed around the kind of relationship that's expected. The source notes that the biblical God seeks covenant, grace, personal relationship, and values free will, offering forgiveness through sacrifice.
Okay, and Allah.
The Quranic Allah, in stark contrast, demands unwavering Islam, which literally means submission and absolute obedience. The source claims there's little emphasis on personal relationship or forgiveness earned through grace. It's a master-servant dynamic, not a father-child one.
And the practical consequence of that focus on submission, according to the source, is laid bare in the socio-political realm.
They argue that this singular focus on obedience leads inexorably to tyranny when it's applied as a system of governance through Sharia law. The authority is purely vertical, and it requires the suppression of individual freedoms and conscience in the name of that divine will.
The source also highlights a specific promise made to martyrs.
Yes, the promise of paradise in Islam, specifically the reward of 72 virgins for martyrdom in jihad. This is explicitly labeled a lure, an earthly, carnal promise designed to inspire violence and perpetrate a cycle of terror and bloodshed. This, the source claims, stands in stark opposition to the Christian promise of eternal life through selfless love and faith.
The third major critique then details what the source calls Islam's active, non-cooperative relationship with other faiths. The claim is that it actively undermines rather than peacefully coexists with existing revelations.
We can start with Christianity. The source claims that Islam actively undermines the foundations of Christianity by denying the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It asserts that these events were illusions, that Christ was replaced, or that the appearance was deceptive.
And the source then cites the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians.
Yes, 1 Corinthians 15.114. If Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. The source argues that this denial is specifically designed to strike at the very heart of Christianity, rendering it theologically null and void in the eyes of Islam. It demonstrates an ethos of hostility rather than integration.
This alleged hostility is then extended directly to Judaism and the nation of Israel.
The source accuses Islam of actively seeking the eradication of the nation of Israel, viewing its continued existence as both a political obstacle and a theological offense to the establishment of global Islamic dominance. The source notes that this sentiment is echoed by extremists who are cited as stating that Adolf Hitler did not finish the job, and they claim this theology fuels persistent, state-sponsored anti-Semitism and calls for violent jihad against Jews globally.
And finally, they address the long and often devastating historical relationship with Hinduism, or Sanatana Dharma, in South Asia.
Right. The sources point to massive historical invasions that span centuries, leading to forced conversions, the systemic smashing of idols, and a devastating legacy of destruction. They cite specific evidence of temples being replaced by mosques, arguing this is due to Islam's inherently expansionist ethos that tolerates no rivals, especially polytheistic or idolatrous faiths.
So the cumulative conclusion of the source is that Islam fits the precise pattern of a false religion.
A blend of partial truths twisted into fundamental error, as they put it, inspired by Satan to create maximum division and mislead the masses during the final dark age. It's an incredibly strong set of claims.
And yet, despite this overwhelming and severe critique of the belief system itself, the source emphasizes the absolute necessity of separating the believer from the belief.
Yes, that is a critical distinction to maintain. They demand maximum effort in compassion and education directed at the individuals who follow Islam. The source stresses that many Muslims are sincere seekers who are raised in a system where apostasy can be punishable by death, which naturally stifles any intellectual doubt or spiritual questioning.
So what is the duty of the enlightened then, according to this text?
Their duty is to teach these individuals that Allah is not the true loving God of Yahweh Vishnu. And this requires profound compassion, education, and patient dialogue, sharing the gospel's message of grace and highlighting the spiritual and historical contradictions found within the Quran, rather than resorting to compulsion or condemnation of the individual.
And this section pivots directly into the assertion that Islam, as a religion born of the Dark Age, will inevitably fade into obsolescence in this new age of prosperity. It will be naturally replaced by the universal truth embodied in Sanatana Dharma.
This is the triumph narrative. Sanatana Dharma, which the source adamantly corrects is mistakenly called Hinduism, is declared not to be a religion at all, but the eternal cosmic order. The translation is crucial here. Sanatana means eternal, and Dharma means law, or duty, or the inherent nature of things.
So it's like a universal framework.
Exactly, the unchanging universal framework that governs existence. It is the fundamental truth that humanity cannot deny, just as, one cannot argue with the physical law of gravity. It just is.
So the claim is that God has been born a Hindu precisely because this path, this philosophy, embodies the purity and timelessness of this eternal framework, and it's devoid of the temporal, human-invented dogmas that define what they call the fragmented religions.
That's the argument. The assertion is that in the coming age of unity, all of humanity will naturally embrace this truth. They will unite under its banner, replacing all past fragmented beliefs, including the Abrahamic faiths.
Which are seen as provisional.
Provisional, temporary constructs that successfully fulfilled their purpose during the age of the devil, but are no longer relevant in the direct presence of the divine.
And this moves us into a deeper, more philosophical analysis of the role of Scripture itself. If the age of unity is dawning and the divine presence is here, what happens to the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, all the other sacred texts that defined the previous ages?
This brings us to the doctrine of fulfillment, why Scripture must step aside when God speaks.
It's a radical idea.
It's a truly radical analysis of sacred texts. The Bible and other scriptures, they argue, are sacred because they point toward God. They function as a guide, a preparation, a witness to his coming. They are essential maps, but they are not the destination itself.
The moment of fulfillment occurs when the traveler reaches the destination.
And the signpost is no longer needed. So this is where the core implication lies. When God, the eternal King, is physically present on earth, Scripture must complete its mission and step aside. Its purpose as an intermediary, a messenger, is finally complete.
And the source warns of a serious spiritual danger here: misplaced faith.
Yes. Clinging to the map, the Scripture, the tradition, the institution, and ignoring the land, the living God's presence. This mistake, they remind us, has happened before.
2,000 years ago.
They cite that sobering historical lesson. Those who knew Scripture best 2,000 years ago were the very ones who failed to recognize God standing right in front of them, precisely because they prioritized the study of the text over recognizing the living embodiment of the text promises.
So if God is living and eternal, revelation cannot be frozen in time. The moment God speaks directly, in an unmediated presence, the age of interpretation ends. The era of religious debate ends.
And profound, radical, active listening becomes the only faithful response. It creates a stark, beautiful metaphor.
Which is,
when the sun rises at dawn, do you continue to argue about the merits of the lamp you use to navigate the darkness? No. You open your eyes to the light. The transition is inherently disruptive and uncomfortable for institutions built on text and tradition. But the source argues that faith was never meant to terminate in a book or an institution. It was meant to prepare the heart to recognize and receive God when he comes.
and this concept of fulfillment and completion, it completely reframes one of the most familiar and often recited prayers in Christian tradition, the Lord's Prayer.
Yes, the source re-examines it as the ultimate expression of this coming fulfillment.
What's the analysis there?
The analysis points out a powerful theological tension within the prayer. The prayer is addressed explicitly to Yahweh, our Father, and it explicitly asks for his kingdom and his will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. It is a prayer for the direct reign of the Supreme Being.
But the source then identifies a major contradiction in common Christian practice.
Right. The tendency for Christians to say that Jesus Christ will return as king, not the Father directly.
And that subtle shift is, according to the source, the heart of the theological tension.
It is. Jesus taught people to pray to the Father, asking for the direct, unmediated reign of God himself. The source argues that claiming the prayer refers to Jesus returning as king is to subtly shift its meaning, to replace Yahweh with a proxy or an intermediary, even though the prayer itself makes no such substitution.
So the Lord's Prayer, when understood in its purest form, is a literal request for God himself to come and establish direct authority over the earth.
That's the claim. And this analysis of the Lord's Prayer leads directly to the logical, unavoidable consequence of that prayer being answered: the inevitable collapse of religious mediation.
Because if the prayer is truly answered, then reality on earth must become identical to the reality of heaven.
Exactly. And what is heaven's reality? The source states unequivocally: there is no religion, there are no temples, there is no need for priests or scriptural debate. There is only the direct, unmediated presence of God. The need for separation is gone.
Therefore, the very purpose of religion is revealed to be provisional, a temporary utility.
It's defined as a bridge built across absence, built to guide humanity while God was not physically present in their reality. When God's direct presence defines reality on earth, as it does in heaven, religion is no longer necessary.
It doesn't collapse in failure.
No, it completes its mission. It bows and it steps aside, allowing humanity to live not by complex belief systems about God, but in the immediate, direct presence of God himself. This profound, quiet radicalism is the spiritual foundation of the age of abundance.
Okay. If spiritual truth culminates in the direct reign of the divine, and prophecy converges on a single figure who has arrived, how does this translate into the practical, day-to-day existence of humanity? We have to transition now to the most practical part of the roadmap, the economic blueprint, this new vision of peace and prosperity that starts in Nepal.
And this is where the spiritual meets the material in a very concrete way. The source argues that to achieve the age of abundance, the fundamental problem money itself must be dismantled. Money is not just flawed. It is the root source of humanity's deepest inequalities and conflicts.
Because it concentrates power, rewards speculation,
and incentivizes exploitation over genuine contribution. So the proposed alternative has to be revolutionary. It It has to move beyond currency scarcity and towards a fairness that is rooted in inherent human dignity.
And they propose a completely moneyless, time-based economy.
This system completely redefines value away from speculative currency. Value is measured not in dollars or euros or rupees, but in time units. And the foundational principle is simple, radical, and absolute. 1 hour of work equals 1 time unit.
And here is the core equity principle that just shatters the existing economic hierarchy. All work is valued equally, regardless of social status, difficulty, training, or profession.
Think about the implications of that for a second. A highly trained neurosurgeon, a primary school teacher, a farmer cultivating crops, and a sanitation worker cleaning the streets. All of them earn the exact same hourly value.
So if they work an 8-hour day, they all earn 8 time units.
Exactly. Contribution to society, measured purely by the commitment of time, becomes the new organizing principle.
But how does a system like that actually function in practice? I mean, we need to look at the mechanics. If a doctor and a janitor earn the same, how do you prevent the system from just collapsing? Or how are goods even priced?
So the sources explain that the total pool of time units earned collectively by everyone funds the societal infrastructure and production. Goods and services are then priced based on the average time required to produce them.
Give me an example.
Okay, if a loaf of bread takes a collective 15 minutes of effort, from farming the wheat to milling it to baking it and delivering it, it costs 0.25 time units. Housing, medical care, utilities, they're all similarly priced based on the time expenditure required to build and maintain them. Since everyone has the same spending power per hour worked, the concept of poverty based on wage gaps it disappears.
This also eliminates the ability to hoard resources or create monopolies based on capital, because time units can't be invested or compounded through interest.
Precisely. They are fundamentally a reflection of spent labor. They're designed to be used for consumption and necessary services, not for creating perpetual extractive wealth. The source argues this structure shifts human incentive away from competitive accumulation and toward collective productivity.
And it ensures that the most necessary, sometimes the dirtiest jobs are always filled.
Because the person doing that essential job has the exact same societal spending power as the person in the most prestigious role. There's dignity in all contribution.
And this framework allows for the correction of structural injustices that have plagued civilizations for millennia, specifically the inclusion of traditionally unpaid invisible labor.
This is arguably the most transformative social element of the entire blueprint. The source explicitly details that women working at home, caring for children, managing households, preparing food, sustaining families, are fully recognized as quantifiable contributors to society.
And they earn the same time-based compensation.
The exact same time-based compensation as any other form of measured work. The source calls this the correction of one of the oldest structural injustices in human civilization. It finally values the domestic economy at par with the commercial economy.
But how is that domestic contribution quantified or tracked in a fair way? Is it based on like a societal average or something?
The manifesto suggests a communal accountability system. It could involve peer-based assessment and societal averaging, recognizing that the effort required to manage a household with young children is equivalent in societal value to a full-time professional job. The goal is to provide economic dignity and independence to those whose essential contributions have historically been excluded from any GDP calculation.
So if the incentive to hoard or exploit is removed, how does the source envision human behavior changing? I mean, doesn't this lack of extreme wealth limit innovation? That's the classic counterargument.
The source argues the opposite. It says innovation accelerates because it's directed toward collective benefit rather than private profit. Modern technology, automation, AI, they're all used to reduce the amount of time required for human labor. That becomes the new definition of efficiency.
And since no single individual can capture the massive gains of that automation,
the benefit is distributed equally. It comes in the form of increased abundance and reduced necessary working hours for everyone. Success is measured by societal well-being and the quality of collective life, not by the accumulation of personal wealth.
So this is not a model rooted in some kind of socialist scarcity, but rather a technologically driven abundance that's distributed equitably. It uses that spiritual principle of non-attachment, where people work to contribute, not to dominate, as the engine for its economic system.
Exactly. The entire movement, while spiritually driven by the age of the Messiah, is fundamentally non-sectarian in its economic application. Its foundation is moral order, valuing equality, dignity, and shared purpose. And Nepal is the seed ground, the place to demonstrate that a functional, just alternative is possible.
With the ultimate goal being global application once the model proves successful.
Right. The core belief driving this entire plan, whether it's economic or spiritual, is unwavering. Humanity lacks neither resources nor intelligence. It lacks fundamental moral and economic alignment. The age of abundance is simply the forced realignment of these structures.
And the work to prove that a different way of living is possible has, according to the source, already begun. They are challenging the world with a profound question. What would society look like if every single human hour, regardless of profession, were valued equally?
And that question is now being tested in reality, making the convergence of prophecy intrinsically linked to the invention of a radical new economic system rooted in time, not currency.
We have covered just an immense transformative amount of ground today. We began by establishing the grand historical cycle of the Age of the Devil ending and the crucial personal test required to survive it. Mastering money, using that specific model of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to illustrate perfect non-attachment and moral governance.
We then dove deep into the theological claim of convergence, that Jews, Christians, and Hindus all await the same divine presence. Yahweh being Vishnu, whose return is not speculation, but a repeated historical precedent, documented as history in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, correcting the course of civilization when Adharma peaks.
And we explored the world-altering assertion that the Messiah has already arrived, a Hindu figure inaugurating the Age of Prosperity from the epicenter of Nepal, bringing the spiritual expectations of all major faiths to their fulfillment.
We then had to carefully navigate the highly polemical claims against Islam, detailing the source's fierce critique regarding the historical basis of Muhammad, the distortion of the nature of Allah into what they call a tyrannical figure, and the system's alleged hostility toward other faiths. This concluded with the assertion that Sanatana Dharma, the eternal cosmic order, will ultimately unify humanity, replacing all provisional religious institutions.
And finally, we analyzed that radical implication that when the living God is present, Scripture and religion must complete their mission and step aside, a concept dramatically illustrated by analyzing the Lord's Prayer as a direct plea for Yahweh's reign, which leads directly to the practical blueprint of the moneyless, time-based economy that ensures equality by compensating all labor, crucially including traditionally unpaid domestic work.
The sources provide a single, unified conclusion. True spiritual freedom from the age of the devil requires simultaneous action. It demands both recognizing the divine presence and dismantling the structures of currency and inequality. This alignment, spiritual recognition, moral mastery, and economic justice is the key to the promised universal peace and abundance.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, navigating a world that seems increasingly chaotic? If the ultimate goal of prayer and prophecy is the direct, unmediated rule of God on earth, and if that coming requires all prior institutions, including our systems of finance and our religious texts, to step aside because their purpose is complete, we are left with this final, provocative thought.
If this shift is truly imminent, what structure in your own life are you currently clinging to that might become obsolete in this prophesied age of prosperity? What is the most radical form of letting go, be it of accumulated wealth, of a cherished resentment, of absolute certainty about your own established beliefs, or of your rigid definitions of personal roles? What is the letting go required to prepare your heart for a shift this massive?
Something to mull over as we all navigate the end of this age and the potential dawn of the next. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.